One of the beauties about being a quilter is the freedom that we have, the creative freedom to choose how we put things together, what colors to use, what kind of fabrics. Yes, there are some hard and fast rules that some follow, particularly if you're going to be in a juried show or something of that nature. But generally speaking, quilters have a lot of flexibility, and I love that. I love to be able to pick and choose my favorites, put it together, and create something wonderful. And this is that for me today. I love doing low volume quilts, and you see the one behind me. This is what we did last week, and it turned out beautiful. And you see how there are two different blocks, a star block, and it's alternating with a 9 patch. We're going to do something similar but very different on this quilt today. We're going to do an alternating block like this, and it's going to have a star, but we're working with wonky stars. They're so much easier and forgiving because they can be anything that you want. So we're going to make some blocks, a couple different sizes. Some will have wonky corners, some will have some wonky stars, and it is going to be beautiful. So I want to get started here with you and show you what we're going to do. We're going to talk a bit first about choosing low volume fabrics, because this quilt will be all low volume fabrics, except of course for our wonky corners and stars. Those are the colors that are going to pack a punch in this quilt. So let's go ahead and get started. I do hope you've subscribed to my channel. If you haven't, please do. Just click the button below, and then every time I have a new video out, we can join each other and share ideas. And please, if you enjoy the video, give me a thumbs up. I'm really anxious to show you this quilt, so let's get started. Before we get into the construction of what we're making here, I do want to talk a little bit about low volume fabrics. What we're making here is a completely low volume quilt. We are using accent fabrics to add more interest, but all the fabrics we're using are going to be considered low volume quilts. So let's talk about the three things that I use specifically to determine what a low volume fabric is. The first thing is a low volume fabric has a neutral background. So this has white, this one has white. I have some of these with a lot of color, and I'm doing that intentionally. These are white, and see how this group is all pretty much white background. Now, because it's dominantly a white color, I can use these as low volume fabric. Now, on these, which are brighter, they're pastels. I can use the light ones, but I prefer to use the background that has the lightest value, the lightest color value, and the value means how much color is in it. So if it's white, it just doesn't have any color in it, and that makes it a very neutral background. But we can also use a beige or a cream or a batik. So these are all considered low volume as well. And I have this other bundle I wanted to show you. That, see how these backgrounds, there's a lot of whites, there's creams, this is creamy. Now, what I also want to talk about are the prints. You don't want to necessarily use all solids in your low volume quilt, because that would get boring. What you do want to do is add some sparsely printed fabric. So remember, we have a low volume background that's usually white, cream, beige, tan, gray, those kinds of colors, and they're low intensity, low volume, low value. They don't have a lot of color that really stands out. Now, the other thing is you're going to find them with prints, and you want subtle prints. You don't want to go, well, like these. You don't want to go with these kind of prints in your low volume quilt unless that's your intent to create contrast. And this would look great, and that's where I'm going with this particular bundle. But as I said, this quilt that we're working on here is all low volume. And so I'm keeping my fabrics in that color scheme, or that, what do I want to say, that value scheme. Now, we've got all kinds of different backgrounds. Some have color. These are gray. And this is just a group within a certain color family that all worked really well together. So these work great, but here are some others that I like to use. Let's see, right here. And you'll see there are prints here and here. And notice the background is different colors. It has, you maybe see better up close. It has white, but it also has some beigey background, and then the blue flowers in varying colors. But they're pastel, they're light, they're low value, they're low volume. And even something like this, the dominant feature in this is the white background, but the prints are more of an accent. So when you combine these pieces together, they work really well because you have the continuity of the background tying it together. So that's my quick and brief low volume, no, I didn't take any volume today, low volume quilt information fabric. Okay, that got me distracted. That was too funny. So I want to show you the first block. This quilt is going to be made with two different blocks. One is going to be a 16 patch. 16 patch means there's 16 blocks in the, or 16 squares in the block itself. And so I have 4 by 4, which is my 16. Now the first thing I did was make the 4 patches. Now, I go into this more in depth later on, but I just want to show you how this is constructed. So each set of 4 patches are going to be sewn together to create a full 16 patch. But first what I do before I sew them together is I want to add a few wonky corners. I love doing this, and this works great with low volume fabrics because you can take a group of fabrics that work with what you're going with. And this is sort of a spectrum of colors, mostly pastels. They're all batiks. They're watercolor batiks, so there aren't any prints that will conflict with these prints. I don't want to have so many prints in here that it becomes distracting. So these appear to be a solid compared to everything else. And that's exactly what I want. I want them to stand out, but yet when you look up close, you can see that there's variations in those colors, in the watercolor. So there's a bit of, like this one has light green, dark green, some blue, some yellow. And that just, like I said, every little bit that you add creates interest in your quilt. It's a bit of contrast, and that's what these blocks are for. I have a course that I did for low volume quilting, and the first quilt in there is a very simple quilt made with squares like this, and there's nothing else in there, but it's a pink tone. All these prints have lots of little tiny pink prints, and it looks wonderful because you get that pink color throughout the quilt, yet you don't have a lot of conflict between the fabrics and the colors. It works out nicely. So I just want to show you some of these. I have the first 5. We're going to need 10 of these finished 16 patch blocks, and then we need to make 10 of the second group. These are what I call wonky corners. The next group is going to be the wonky stars, and you're going to love it. But I wanted to do this part first because it's the easiest. I want you to understand low volume fabric, and I want you to see how to put this together. And so here is my first block, and I use anywhere from 3 to 5 corners in the block. And you see I put them in different places. Now, as the blocks go together, some of these are going to match up in different places, but that's okay. It's kind of fun. And so here's one with 4, and here's one that I actually put 2 corners together in the middle. And that's just sort of a fun little bit of color that's going to stand out when you're looking at the quilt. This had kind of more of a bolder print that I necessarily wanted, so I sort of toned it down with a corner. And that wonky corner, and I say wonky because they go every which way. They can be long and skinny, they can be short and squat. It's just a matter of how you place them, and I'm going to show you how all that works too. And the idea of the orange is to bring out some of the colors here. All right, so here's another one. And see how they're just placed in different spots. This one, I guess they all have 4. I don't have any here that have any of the five corners. I'll do those next. But see how this yellow brings out the yellow in that block? This is sort of a brown color, so put a little orange there, or completely contrast and put green next to the moon and stars. It's just fun. There's no right or wrong. So I wanted to show you this before we get started. And now we're going to get into the tutorial of how to make these blocks. You have an idea what low volume fabrics are, how to select them, how to work with them, and then think about the wonky corners you want to add, the contrast fabrics you want to include. So I have my pieces for the next 5 blocks that I need to finish. And then, actually, I'm going to do a second video with the other set of blocks because it gets pretty involved. It takes more putting together because we're adding a star, not just random corners. So this will be a 2-part video, but you will enjoy it. It's a beautiful, beautiful quilt, and I can't wait to show it to you finished. My first one I donated, so it's not here anymore, but I'll link the blog post down below so you can look at it. It's really, really pretty, and it has these hot pink batik stars in there that I really, really like. So take a look at that blog post, and you can see some pictures there. And what I may do, if I can find one of the old pictures, is put it at the end of this video as well. So here we go. Let's get started. We're going to go through and select the fabrics that we're using. I'm going to show you how to make the blocks, and then we're going to have the first half of our quilt ready to go. So let's quilt. After the recent quilt we made, the low volume star quilt, I had a lot of low volume fabrics out. Many I used, but not all of them. So I thought this is a great opportunity to get them all organized, put them together, and make a quilt. So I have some that I haven't even opened yet. I used some of these on the last quilt. These I haven't touched. These are primarily a cream background with assorted gray prints. And this one here is also cream with sort of a, I don't know, a rusty red color, I guess is what I want to say, and then sort of some golden brown. So that looks really pretty. And I have some leftovers from my Sand and Sky Batiks, the Hoffman Batiks. Love these fabrics. I ordered another set of Fat Quarters. I've got to have more. I need to make this quilt bigger. I absolutely love them. Fat Quarter Shop. There'll be a link down below for different fabric ideas, and you can look at that there. I have some Batik low volumes like these, and this one obviously is just a print, but I've got some yellow creamy, some white creamy. This is sort of a blue. This is a gray. These are lots of pre-cut pieces I have left over. And what do I have here? I have just, you know, all kinds of different bits and pieces that I'm going to incorporate. And what we're going to do, here are the Batiks. I love Batik low volumes. I just think they're so pretty. And of course, these prints, which there's an assortment of, and my little cute pink, or excuse me, teal hearts, and more Batik low volume, and this is the Vert from the Art Gallery Fabrics. So there's a really good collection. Then I have these, they're basically watercolor batiks, and they're just some really pretty spring colors. And what I want to do with this quilt, it's going to be basic patchwork. We're going to have 2 different blocks. One block is going to be 16 squares. It'll be 4 by 4. And the second block is going to be 36 squares, which will be 6 by 6. And the reason for that is I want to have the size of the fabrics be a little different, but most importantly, we're going to eliminate a lot of matching seams. Because when you do low volume, you tend to use a lot of squares on the smaller side, and when you're running a bunch of them together, it can get tiresome. And the other thing you can do is make strip sets. And while I often like to do strip sets, and we are going to do some here, I don't want to do the whole thing in strip sets, because then where I have one fabric next to another in a strip set, every time I see these three, they're always going to be together in the quilt. So I don't want to do that. I'll do that sometimes, but I'm also going to make my strip sets shorter so I don't get as many of the repeating patterns within the quilt. So that's kind of where I am here. So, oh, there's a few other pieces underneath. So let me go ahead and get this pulled together, and I'm going to group it into what the plan is and come up with some dimensions and sizes of exactly what we're going to make. I do know that we're going wonky. So we're going to have some wonky corners on some of these. On the 16 patch, the larger block, or the larger square block, is going to have some wonky corners, but the 36 block, the 36 patch block, I should say, that's a mouthful, is going to be a wonky star, and we're going to have a few of those in there. So let's go ahead and pull this together. We'll start getting some fabrics the way we want them, and we're going to start making a quilt. I love it. Low volume. It's going to be gorgeous. So as I said, we're going to make two different size blocks. We're going to have a 16 patch and a 36 patch. This will be made out of 2.5-inch squares. This will be made out of 3.5-inch squares. Both will end up being 12-inch blocks, which is perfect because they're going to line up. It's going to be easy to sew together, and there'll be no matching seams. And I just think it adds a little interest to have some of the blocks different colors, not colors, different sizes. It's just going to create a bit more interest in the quilt. And then when we get in there and add our wonky stars, then that's going to create even more interest. So what I did is I divided my fabrics in half. And I went through the white tones, cream tones, beige colors, and I sort of divided them into two equal piles. All the 16 patches will be made from these fabrics. All the 36 patches will be made from this. The beauty in that is when I'm putting my blocks together, not only are there no matching seams, there are no duplicating fabrics. So I don't have to worry about what's going next to what, because they're not going to have the same fabrics in each of the blocks. I did put a few extra in the 36, so when I was dividing them up, if I had an odd number, I'd throw the extra one in this pile. Only because I'm going to need 36 squares in each of these, I'm only going to need 16. Now, one of the other things I did is something that was particularly colorful and bright. I put on this side because those are the smaller squares. So they'll stand out, but I don't want them to be so bold. These are more subtle colors. As much as I could. So that's where I'm at. The next thing is to cut strips down out of each of these piles, and I'm going to cut them from fat quarters. Most of these are either fat quarters or remnants of fat quarters. Some of these larger pieces are yardage, but that's okay. I'll work through that. And then we're going to do some strip sets, some cross cutting, and we'll get some blocks made. We're going to focus on the 16 patch first, and we'll talk about some wonky corners and some ideas we can do there. And then once that's finished, we'll get into the 36 patch where we can play around with some wonky stars. So let me get some cutting done, and we'll take a look then at how we're going to put these blocks together and what options we have. So give me a few minutes and I'll get started. In doing the 16 patch, we're going to cut 3.5-inch strips, and we cut them 3.5 inches by the length of the fat quarter that is 21 inches wide, so the widest width. You want to cut from selvage to cut edge, and that's going to give you your longest strip. And what we're going to do is sew pairs together, and you just want to make sure, there's enough contrast between them, that they don't have exactly the same colors or prints, things like that. And once that strip is sewn down one side, you're going to take a 1/4 inch seam. Then we're going to take this piece and cross cut it. So once it's sewn, we have two pieces like this, the full length of that fabric. And this measures 6.5 inches. Now what we're going to do is cut this to 7-inch lengths because we need to make a 4 patch out of these, and we have to allow that extra 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. So here's my 7-inch, here's my 7-inch. Not quite enough for 7-inch here, but as long as I can get a 3.5 inch, I'm going to cut it because that will give me an opportunity to match up, where some pieces, not all my fat quarters had the full width. I had cut some off, so some of them are coming up short, but I can use these shorter pieces together to create the blocks that I need. So I have 1, 2, 3.5. 1, 2, 3.5. Yep, right there. So I'm just going to set these extra pieces aside. Here's my 3.5 there. That's good to go. I have 2 of these. Now what I'm going to do is take these 7-inch strips that I've sewn, and I'm going to pair them up. And what I'm going to do is put them right sides together, and I want to match this seam right here. And I'm going to sew it with that seam right there being nested. This is going to be the center point of my 4 patch, so it's important to get that nested good and tight so you have a great seam when you're sewing. You're going to go through your pieces and sew them all on one side, just chain stitch as you go, then come back and do the same on the other. And then this is what you'll get. So you'll see on this piece, I think you can see where the stitching is here as well as here. And there's 2 different fabric strip sets on each side, because otherwise we're going to have duplicates within our block. So this is currently 6.5 inch high by 7 inches wide. And we're going to cut this at 3.5 inches to 3.5. And when we open them, we are going to have a 6.5 by 6.5 inch square. This is our 4 patch, and we're going to use 4 of these together to create our 16 patch. But there is one other step first. Before we get to that though, we want to make all our 4 patches. So we need 10 blocks that are 16 patches. So 4 of these per block means we need 40 of these. So I'm going to go ahead and get those sewn up. Then we're going to add a few wonky corners just to keep things interesting before we assemble these. I want to show you some tricks with that. So go ahead and get your strips cut, 3.5 inch, pair them up, cut them into 7-inch strips. Then we're going to take those 7-inch strips, put them together, sew the sides, cut them across, and there's our 4 patch. Okay, let's go. Let's get these finished. With our 44 patches all sewn together and ready to go, we are going to make our 16 patch. So we're going to take 4 of these, combine them in a manner that we like, and we don't want to duplicate fabrics and such. And then what we're going to do is add some color in the corners. Now, if you choose, you can certainly just, take your 4 and sew them together like this, and you'll have, a wonderful block. And that's fine. But sometimes it's fun to add a little extra color, and that's what we're going for here. So I want to show you how I did this. And what I did is I took my accent fabrics that I'm going to use, and I cut a 3.5 inch block. Now you can go any size, and it's just relative to what size block you're working with. And the larger the block, then the larger the square you want to go with. And if you're using like small 2-inch squares, you're going to obviously go with a smaller piece. Now, the other thing is you want to cut these so that you can angle them at different points in your square. You'll see here on this group, this first one that I did, I will cut them. I don't go corner to corner. I generally will kind of go off center a little bit so you can get your corners going this way or that. And I'm going to go this with that wider end here and narrower there. This one, the reason I don't want to go corner to corner is both these end up being the same size and I want them to be different. So I'm going to actually, yeah, because I don't want them to be the same size, so I'll go narrow here, thicker there. So it's pretty much going to be the same as that. I have to push really hard because I have about 12 layers of fabric under there. Okay, so we have our corner pieces. Now what we're going to do is put them together. And the idea being that, let's say you want to put a red right here. You need to be able to lay this, let's get it right up here, so that it will cover that white square. So if you have it like this, obviously that's not going to work. So what you can do is kind of put this in the square and then fold your fabric the first couple times just to get an idea of how it's going to fit. But I generally will fold this over roughly 1/4 of an inch and then sort of play with it. Do I want it to go more this way, this way? Do I want to go across the top? And you just kind of, you know, find a spot that fits, press it down, and then I'm going to sew right along that line. And then when I fold it over, I have my square corner right there. So let me show you on a couple of these. You'll notice that these are hanging over. So what I did is I put my corner here, and then when I press that up, I'm going to turn around to the other side and trim off those edges because I want to keep my square. And if I don't trim these edges off, there's a good chance my block won't end up square. So we now have this like that. And I'll tell you, when I have a lot of small blocks that I'm doing this on, like, you know, when we do the next set with the 2.5 inch squares that finish at 2, and I'm just doing small corners, I'll just leave this like that because this will help to reinforce and stabilize this, because we've got a little bit on a bias, a bit of an angle, and it could stretch. And this just gives it a little extra support. So that's your call. A lot of times I'll leave the little ones on there. When I get to the big one though, see this one here, I sewed from here to here. So you don't necessarily have to follow that edge for your seam. You sew according to where you want the corner to fall. Once your corners are trimmed and you press so everything's nice and flat, you're going to sew your block together and you have a 16 patch. This one here I finished. I just want to show you. Now this had 4 corners. Like I said, I think anywhere from 1 to 5 is good, and it just depends on what you prefer, how much color you want, and what your accents are, how they work with your fabrics. Do you want to match them up? There's just all kinds of things that you can do. And then in the alternating blocks, we're going to make some wonky stars as well as the corners. So this is where we are. We're going to make 10 blocks just like this. Then we're going to switch to these smaller squares and make 10 blocks out of the 2.5 inch strips. Now with that, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to make the 4 patches, but instead of 4, we're going to need 6 in order to, oh, actually we're going to need 9 in order to get our 36 patch block, because we'll have 6 by 6. So let's go ahead and get started on that. I don't want to sew that together yet. I want to show you how we're going to piece those, because it's going to be a little bit different when we add the stars. So let me get that fabric cut. I'll get started on showing you that process, and before you know it, we're going to have a finished quilt, and it's going to be so bright and colorful. This will be a lot of fun. Here's an image of the original quilt I made. What we're doing today is slightly different in that a lot of these blocks are going to be different sizes. These I'll finish at 2-inch. We'll have some that are 3 and some that are 2, which will create a little bit more interest, I think, throughout the quilt. But you can see how these wonky corners are spread throughout the quilt. You can also see the stars. Now, the quilt that I'm making here with this video on this tutorial will also have 3 stars. You can choose out of the 10 blocks that we're making in these sizes how many of those will be stars, and that's up to you. Whether you do all the blocks every other block or randomly 3, 5, whatever you prefer. So let me show you the next little bit closer up view. Here's a close-up. You can see how the stars are overlapping. They're placed on top of the pieced blocks, and how all these wonky corners just sort of fit in. And the stars are all different colors. They're all different pink and fuchsia batiks, which turned out really pretty. Let me show you a star up close. And here's one of the stars by itself with the background. Notice, remember I said that these low volume fabrics had pink prints in there, and it really helped to bring the pink out of the stars. And so this was a predominantly pink quilt, and it just turned out adorable. And I could have just kept these corners all shades of pink, but I liked getting all those different colors in there. It just made it that much more interesting. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you choose. So I can't wait till we get our quilt finished. This is what it's going to look like, something along these lines. So get your fabric together and choose the colors you want for your stars. And we're going to make stars in the next tutorial. I'm so glad you're here with me today. It's been fun sharing this. And I do hope you subscribe if you haven't already. And please give me a thumbs up. That way we can let everyone know how much fun we're having. Have a great day. See you next time.